Joining us, Politico reporter and co-author of New York Playbook, Emily Ngo. Aaron Haynes and Megan Hayes are still here with us, too. Emily, I'll begin with you and your reaction to that video that we just showed there of him going into, I think that's 85 Clarkson Avenue in Brooklyn, standing basically shoulder to shoulder with tenants, walking through their apartment, picking up tiles on the floor. I'm not sure that I've seen a mayor of any city do something like that right after they step into office. What do you think he's trying to show and say there?
Showing where his priorities are right off the bat. Fresh off his inauguration at City Hall, he travels to a corner of Brooklyn where tenants are threatening a rent strike, where they've been living for decades in conditions that I think a lot of people living in the city who are wealthier, better off, can't even imagine is a reality. And this has been a priority of his from the campaign trail, from the moment that he stepped from relative obscurity into the limelight, into the spotlight, and has captured the attention of the nation and of the world, bringing it back to those in the working class and struggling to make it. He wants a rent freeze by appointing people to the Rent Guidelines Board, and he wants to build more housing. And so with his first couple actions, he's showing that he's hoping that anyone who might stand in his way, who might resist, who might be skeptical of what he's doing next could think twice.
Megan, how do you think Democrats are watching and learning from Zohran Mamdani's ascendance here in New York? Because often when I talk to them, there's a lot of back and forth about what pieces of his success and his strategy they can take. Is it we're going to all be on social media? Is it that we're just going to talk more about affordability and housing like he has focused on? Or if it's something else here? And I wonder because, you know, to stand with people, to go into a place like that on your first evening as mayor is, as I said, again, an unusual act. Do you think that Democrats will do more than just, I guess, copy his social strategy, his campaign strategy here, and take something else from what he's done now in his first day as mayor?
I think what you're seeing here is he's trying to draw attention to some issues that most people don't understand who don't live in New York City. There's an extreme wealth gap in New York City, so I think that he's trying to draw attention. He's also trying to show that he wants to show action, and he's committing to his campaign promises, which is really an admirable idea on his first day in office. So I do think that people will take that from it. People want solutions. They don't want to hear people keep talking about what they need or what Democrats think they need. They actually want to see people doing things, and they want to see people following through with what they're saying. So I think that him going out into housing units and really signing executive orders that matter for the people, all of the people of New York City, is a really important, it's really important for people to see not only in the city, but out in the country.
Aaron, as you listened to his speech yesterday, I wonder what you hear and see about the future in terms of his style of leadership. Because on the one hand, if you listen to his words, what he was saying was, I am very much a democratic socialist. That is who I am. That is how I'm going to govern. At the same time, when you look at his picks, who he's bringing in around him, there are a lot of old school, pragmatic people who do not identify as members of DSA. They're not card-carrying socialists, and they have open disagreements with him on issues. So where do you think he will actually land? Do you think he's going to end up tacking closer to the center, or will he really lead, as he described himself, as a democratic socialist?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main things that I heard were that diversity, equity, and inclusion are key to how to govern in a way that brings everyone along, right? It is key to how he plans to approach this affordability piece. And that is at direct odds with kind of the message that you're hearing from Washington, but it is also the thing that we heard that voters in New York, that voters across the country are wanting, somebody who is going to Megan's point, solve the issues that the American people are wanting to be solved, particularly around the affordability issue. Seeing him in that, that apartment, addressing the issues of those tenants. Housing is one of the main issues when we're talking about affordability, as well as childcare, as well as public transportation. You see him taking the subway. So, seeing him kind of governing in the way that he campaigned, I think is important for people to see, but also that he is going to be a fighter. You have, kind of these big questions around these big priorities. How much is he going to be able to accomplish? But I think right now, for the people that elected him and for really all New Yorkers and people that are watching this in other parts of the country, seeing that he is a fighter. That is what voters are wanting, I think, more than anything this year. Seeing him do that this year, that could set the stage for 2028 in a lot of ways, because voters are wanting to see somebody that is going to fight for them. And if he is somebody that does that, I think he does set an example for a lot of voters going into this cycle and looking ahead to 2028.
Emily, on the question of how he's going to be able to get things done, get results on his signature plans, rent freezes, the free buses, all of that. I'm of two minds personally about this. On one hand, I think that when you have a meteoric rise, you can also have a meteoric fall from public opinion. On the other hand, as I watch him, I get the sense that he has this almost Trump kind of armor, where people have an investment in him and what he represents, and the fact that he listens to them in a way that at least they perceive others have not, that may buy him time and goodwill that other politicians don't have. What do you think?
I think both of those things that you suggested could be true at the same time. He can be this big figure making big promises, and he could have a little bit of a honeymoon period at the same time. His inauguration speech, he set the standard. He didn't manage expectations, which I thought was interesting. He said he would govern expansively and audaciously. So people know that he's got lofty ideals, but he also said that he's willing to put in the work, and he's showing that in his first couple executive actions and his first full day as mayor even. And so I think that people will give him the space that he needs so long as he keeps reaching out. I mean, he's not afraid to be in rooms where he's not necessarily welcome. Business groups and business leaders, including tech interests.
The Oval Office.
The Oval Office, absolutely, is a huge example. Jewish New Yorkers, Black New Yorkers, those who really want to get to know him because they're just curious why he has the gall to seek out this office.
Megan, one of the other fascinating things he's done in just basically the last 24 hours is announce this office that's basically going to leverage his campaign volunteers and bring them into engagement around City Hall. So taking the people who are out knocking doors for him and actually bringing them into governance, finding ways to keep them engaged in events and volunteering now that he's actually in office. Is that something that other Democrats should consider copying?
Absolutely. I think that one thing that we do off cycles is we lose track of who's volunteering and who is doing things and who's boots on the ground for the Democratic Party. And so I do think getting people and keeping people engaged in years it's not an election and when you don't need their vote is extremely important. It keeps your base, it keeps them really riled up and it keeps them into the movement, but it also keeps them engaged in what you're doing and it gives them a voice in the policy. And that's where people want to feel that they're being heard and listened to. And I think it's a really smart idea to keep his supporters engaged.